This is the second part of this tutorial for this trifold vacuum form. Last tutorial, we made this part, which is the pattern. So now what we need to do is derive from this, the surfaces from this that are going to make our part. So these parts that we're going to make are just for the rendering. We're not going to save them out as 3D data or anything. This is the 3D data, this pattern. And this is what we're going to make a 3D print from, and we're actually going to make vacuum form parts. So that'll be our prototype on how to make this. So I'm just going to talk about the rendering part now. So what we need to do is let's go into wireframe, right side, wireframe. So here we can see the bulb coming down under here. I'm going to derive just this one side and the center, that triangle piece. So if we do Shift Control and come in here, that'll allow me to select the faces that we want. So there they are. So I'm going to move a copy. And I have ortho on, so I'm just going to go straight up. I'm going to go to about here and then just right click. Okay, so those are actually more than what we really need. So let's go into perspective and see what we have. And we'll go into shaded. Okay, so these are the parts that we're going to work with. So there's things in here that are going on that we don't need, like this living hinge, this flexible part. We're not going to actually be flexing that. We're just going to put these into position. So what we need to do is take away the surfaces that we don't want. So let's go back to our selection tool and shift control, and then we can grab surfaces. So let's grab a few of these so we can get a feeling for what I'm talking about. So I'm going to select those, delete those. So I'm taking away the parts that we don't need. So this whole indented area for the hinge, we'll take that away. And we'll take this radius away until we're back down to the flange component, which is this round edge. This is all connected now. So if you do shift control, you can select these surfaces and eliminate the ones we don't want. Okay, so that's extracting the part. And let's see if I have that here. Okay, and that's the part up there. Okay, so once we get that, let's go to um, another layer. So here it is with all the parts removed. So I have this space here in the middle. So this was a little challenging for this one because I wanted a little more material here so I could get a radius down at the bottom because we'll sort of see that in the rendering. So a lot of this is just sort of faking it a little bit just so the picture will look good. So what I did was I rebuilt this flange area. I just made another piece and I made it a little bit bigger. And you can see that over here. So this sticks out a little bit. And then I think I had to trim it back because I wanted it a little bit smaller. So it was enough that I could do that. So what I'm getting here is this radius down at the bottom. That was very important, this inside radius, which I did not have on my pattern. But for the part, this will happen as the plastic drapes over the pattern, that little radius will be there. So we want to see that. I kept that pretty tight because we'll catch a little bit of that in the lighting and the rendering. Okay, so these are two-dimensional. These are all surfaces, especially when we go into clear. If it was opaque, we could use this for rendering, but I'm going into clear. So clear, we need to be a little bit more realistic. We need a thickness, a wall thickness. If we put this in clear, it won't render correctly. It looks very strange. So we need a wall thickness. Now this can be a little challenging at times. Let's see what I did here. Okay, those are all open. And then that's the setup part. So there's a couple ways to do this. Um, I did it with the meshes because it didn't hold up. Let's take a look. We can do, let's go back up to offset, like I offset the light bulb. So let's go into the offset command, offset surface, and here are those little arrows again. So this is going to offset in this up direction, which is what we want. So if, and I have it, I believe it's 60. I think I want 30. Enter. And let's see if we have it on solid. Yes. Okay. Okay. Enter. Okay. So it offset it. And we can see the little thickness here. So it looks pretty good, but I think I had a problem doing it with offset surface. So let's take a look at our properties. Yeah, it's an open poly surface, so it is not a solid. So this will not render. So there might have been something wrong, like a radius is off. I took a look at this and I couldn't figure it out. Tech support offered to take a look, but there is another alternative. And since I'm just using this for rendering purposes, I can do this in another way. So I'm going to undo that. So what we can do is we can turn it into a mesh. I'm going to go into my mesh tools, and I believe it's right here. So I'm going to click on this, enter, and I'm just going to turn this into a mesh. So this is more of a faceted type of object, but here this will thicken nicely. So I'm going to select this. The poly surface is still there, so let's just go to the mesh, and then we can offset that here. Um, where was the offset? I'll find it. Um, hmm, Here it is. All right, offset and mesh. So I'm going to click on that, and it's doing it dynamically. So let's just move in here. It's a little crazy looking. Okay, so here I'm just looking at that little edge. So I'm going to do this dynamically, and there we are. So we can see I have that edge there. It's a little bit more forgiving as a mesh than keeping it as a parametric solid. So this should work fine. So it looks a little crazy now because it's got all these ISO lines all over the place, but this will render. So this worked fine because I'm not going to use this as 3D data. It's just to make the picture. So this will work out well. So both of them can work. Now I've done some other thickening processes with the parametric objects and it's worked fine, but this one didn't work for some reason. I'm not sure. Something was a little off. Okay, so I'll show you what I did with that next. Okay, so now I'm back to my surface. Go to my layers. So I took that. Let's just go to here. Now here are these meshes with the thickness all set up. Now you can see down here, I'm kind of faking it a little bit. I didn't even create that rolled edge. The pieces are sort of just sticking out there, but it's okay. It doesn't really show up too much in the rendering. So I'm able to get away with that because I have my background is right there. So now I just took that, turned it up, put it up against the bottom here, and then just mirrored it over to the back. And I left a little space in the middle. So these will render correctly, and we'll see that in a minute. But there's a couple of other components that we need to talk about. The big one is the art. So here's the center part. So all I really did was I created this panel, which came from our very first layout when we started working on this design. And I just used the light bulb to trim this opening in. So I trimmed it with the light bulb, and that gave me the surface. And then I did the same thing down here. I trimmed the light bulb from this panel, and I got these two panels. So this is pretty straightforward. We use the decal tool. So if we go into our properties, this green square, And if you click on that, you can bring the decal in. This is what we did last semester a lot. So it's pretty straightforward. I bring that in and then move that around to get that to line up. So let's just go into rendered mode. So here's my art. So I created this in Illustrator. All I did was bring in some of the art components from the brand, from the website or whatever they had, and I just sort of put this together. It's not really thoroughly designed, but it'll be something like this. The blue is the brand color. I got some of their icons down here about the bulb, and then talking about 94% savings, all these different features, and then the product identity and the brand up at the top. So these are the kind of components that I'm going to have in this package. So we have that. Go back to layers, and we have our bulb that's sitting right in there. So I have a little bit of space. Looks like the bulb moved a little. Huh. All right, I'll check that against the, let's bring in the plastic parts. And I'm just going to go into wireframe. We're going to check the bulb. Looks like it went down a little. I'm not sure why. Right side. Looks like it moved down a little. I was going to move that back up again. I'm a little short at the top here. It's falling below the graphic slightly. So let's move that up. Ortho. So you can see I have the bulb not touching that wall that I created, so it should render very nicely. All right, that looks good. All right. So like I had mentioned on some of the other tutorials, so now I'm going to start to go into rendering and lighting and things like that. So a good idea is to set up a point of view. So moving the perspective around, getting to a point that you like. I'm going to go under set view, and we can go into named views. So I have like 3 of them in here. So I'm going to stay with this first one. So all we do is this little plus sign up here with the camera, and you can save as. You can give a name to them and save these different views. And then once they're set up, all you have to do is come down here under set views and pick one, and it'll automatically put it into that position. So that's a good way to get started. All right, so I'm going to ease into this and show you some of the things that I did. So if we just do rendered at this point. We see our graphics now. The blister itself is kind of dead. We're not really seeing what's going on. So we needed to do lighting. That's what happens when we go into rendered mode. Quite often the graphics and even the product map on here looks pretty good, but the plastics and clear and some of the metallics don't hold up really well. So another thing we can do to check some of the rendering characteristics, instead of going up to render mode all the time, we can go here under this drop-down menu within this portal, and we have ray traced. Ray trace is where it goes back in and it's rendering it just like it is up in the render tool. But what I'm doing here is it's very easily accessible here. I'm turning the ray trace cycles down, way down. And I'm doing down here in the right-hand corner, I have 10 cycles, which is not very much. Excuse me. So we can get a feeling for that. So we can adjust that. I think it starts at like 100, which is a really high resolution. So got this turquoise panel coming in. There we go. So it's a little milky looking. So what I'm trying to do is I'm playing with the refraction and the clarity of the plastic and how shiny it is and how we're lighting it. This takes a little bit of back and forth, but once you get a feel for it, it'll work out pretty well. So it's a little dead. So I don't have anything that exciting going on here at this point. So if we go into our render tools, we have the material. So I brought in clear glass, and that's what I'm using. So I have 100% clarity, but I have the refraction, the IOR, up pretty high. And that's making this a little less clear. Because what happens is if we make it too clear and have the refraction really low, it disappears because it's very, very clear. It's a very, very thin wall. So it's a matter of going back and forth with all that. So once you have your material set up and playing with the lights, you can go back and forth and experiment with different things and then ultimately add a background. Since it is clear, you have it on a white background, it's really hard to see what's going on. So let's get rid of the views. I'm going to go under my rendering dialog here, where we start to talk about the lighting. So starting off with, I have the 360-degree environment. I have that set on studio, which is pretty straightforward. That's giving us a little bit of lighting. So I'm just going to go into rendered. And that gives us a little bit of this lighting that's going on. Actually, that might be coming from the Rhino studio. So a couple of things are interplaying here. We have the 360-degree environment, which is basically just this little gradation around here. And then we have the Rhino Studio 8, and I'm using that for reflection. So that's actually reflecting into the environment. So that's starting to give us some lighting. So that was set up. And then I have the intensity of that skylight relatively low. I think I might change that as we move along. And then I have the custom environment for skylights is also on Rhino Studio 8. So all of these things interplay with one another. It's a little confusing. So when you start fooling with these, just have to experiment and get an idea of how it's affecting it and what's happening. So this is sort of these stock environments that you can bring in that you can play with. In some of the other tutorials, I've talked about some custom lighting. So I'm going to use a little bit of that here. Let's go into lights. And I think we should go to wireframe so we can see them. So I created these two lights. These are just rectangular surfaces, and they're under our render tools. We have some lighting features here. So it's this rectangular light tool. So all we did is from the front view, I just drew a rectangle, and then I turned it around. I moved it, I angled it in from the top view. So it's kind of shining into the part where I want to do that. So I experimented with how this was going to reflect into the part to see how that was going to look. I didn't put any dark objects in the environment. It didn't really seem to work too well with this. I've done that on some bottle designs. So that's my lighting that I added in there. And I think so if you select this and you go into properties, here I have the shadow intensity. I brought that down a little bit. It kind of softens the edges. And then the light intensity was approximately 1. So I brought that down a little bit. This is something else you can also play with. All of these things interact with one another. So it can be a little confusing. So start slow, move some of the calibrations around and get a feel for what's happening. So that's what I have in this environment. So I have those two lights, and then I have these stock things set up, and everything else I didn't really change too much. So this is where it's really handy to have this point of view set up. So set up the view. I'm going to go right to this first, and that brings it right in, which is quite nice. So let's just take a look. We'll go back into our ray trace mode and see what happens when we have those two lights on. Okay, so some of these white areas, these reflections coming in the back, these little highlights up here on the top, and then this big white area coming in here, starting to give it this nice plastic kind of feel. And then even the triangle down here, I've got the label in the back, so that's catching some shadows down at the bottom there. And then we have some shadows and reflections occurring up in this sidewall. So not bad. And then some of the lighting is going into, so it really looks like a piece of plastic in there. So it's still a little kind of milky looking. If I take the refraction off, it'll just become that much more clear. And that can be a little challenging. So I'm going to just play with this lighting right here for a bit and see what this does. I'm just going to pump that up a little. Might give us a little bit more brightness, but it also might kill some of our reflections. Yeah, so I just brought that light up. So it's taking a lot of these reflections and just sort of making them go away, which is kind of a shame. It's kind of dying. So another thing to do here, since this is really clear, we're looking through a lot of clear surfaces. I like what's happening with the light bulb and the blue area. That's kind of nice. It looks really shiny. I'm getting reflections down in here. One way to work with that is to put a background in here. So I have a background set up. So let's see what that does. Background, and I have it on very dark and shiny. So it kind of gives us some theater back here. I think it's on black, and I think I might have used a shiny paint, I think. So now looking through this and seeing the dark background, we can see the reflections of the bulb over here on the left-hand side. And even the reflections coming up into the plastic underneath create some of these dark areas. And even to the side here, we get some interesting reflections. So a lot of those white parts are coming through against the dark. So that's actually kind of interesting looking. And even this dark area down here and in the corners of the bent plastic where it's forming, you get some nice highlights. So it really depends on what kind of rendering. Is it more theatrical or is it more functional and what you want to do? It's playing with all these different details and going back and forth to see how it works. Now, by having that refraction kind of high, it allows these light fixtures up here in the top to really shine in here. Now, what it's doing, it's also distracting from seeing the light bulb. The whole point of having this clear thing is seeing this interesting object in there and seeing the LEDs and all the fins in there. So if I were to show this to a client, they would probably look at me and go, "Well, that's terrible. I can't see the bulb. I want to see my bulb." So I might have to adjust my rendering to accommodate to the audience and who we're talking to. So I've done that. I've worked with graphic designers and I've put reflections all over it. And they're like, "I can't see my art. It looks terrible." So it's a little bit of back and forth to do that. But I think this looks pretty good. I have a couple samples of renderings on lighter backgrounds and neutral backgrounds, and then, of course, this black one. And then I took this and trimmed this down, so it looked pretty good. All right, so that's rendering in Rhino and using some backgrounds and lighting. So that's it for this tutorial.